What if the greatest lie in human history is not who built the pyramids, but when civilization actually began? According to the standard timeline, humans spent nearly 300,000 years as primitive hunter-gatherers. Then, almost suddenly, around 10,000 BCE, civilization appeared. Agriculture, astronomy, megalithic architecture, mathematics, organized religion, massive stone construction across multiple continents. Archaeologists call this the Neolithic Revolution. But there is a problem with that explanation. Civilizations do not emerge fully formed overnight. Modern humans existed long before Sumer, Egypt, or Mesopotamia. Fossil and genetic evidence confirms Homo sapiens had essentially modern brains at least 300,000 years ago. That means for hundreds of millennia, humans supposedly possessed the same neurological capacity we do today, yet built almost nothing permanent. Then suddenly, after the end of the last ice age, everything changed. The timing is suspicious, because exactly 12,800 years ago, Earth experienced one of the most violent climate events in known geological history, the Younger Dryas, and the evidence suggests it may not have been natural. Scientists first noticed the anomaly while studying ice cores from Greenland. Climate data showed temperatures suddenly collapsed near the end of the last glacial retreat. In some regions, temperatures dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius within decades. The warming trend that had been ending the Ice Age abruptly reversed. Something catastrophic happened. Then came the geological evidence. In 2007, researchers published findings identifying a strange sediment layer distributed across North America, Europe, and parts of the Middle East. This layer, now called the Younger Dryas boundary layer, contained materials almost impossible to explain through ordinary terrestrial processes. Nanodiamonds, microspherules, high concentrations of iridium and platinum, large-scale soot deposits. These materials typically form under extreme heat and pressure, conditions associated with asteroid or comet impacts. The nanodiamonds were especially important. They require pressures so intense they are commonly associated with cosmic collisions or nuclear detonations. At multiple sites, researchers also discovered melt glass, rock heated to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius before cooling rapidly. That is not consistent with normal wildfires. It is consistent with an impact event. The current hypothesis suggests fragments of a comet entered Earth's atmosphere around 10,800 BCE. Instead of a single collision, Earth may have experienced multiple airbursts and impacts across the northern hemisphere. One proposed impact zone sits beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland. In 2018, scientists confirmed the existence of a massive crater buried beneath the ice sheet. The crater measures roughly 31 kilometers wide. Shock quartz and geochemical evidence strongly suggest an extraterrestrial impact. If dating confirms alignment with the Younger Dryas onset, it would completely transform our understanding of prehistoric Earth. But the impact itself may not have been the deadliest part. The real destruction came afterward. At the time, much of North America was covered by the Laurentide ice sheet, an enormous glacial mass kilometers thick. If comet fragments struck this ice directly, the result would have been catastrophic beyond modern comprehension. Instant vaporization, mega tsunamis, atmospheric shock waves, continent-scale flooding, millions of tons of fresh water suddenly entering the oceans. This matters because ocean circulation is temperature-dependent. Flooding the North Atlantic with fresh water could disrupt thermohaline circulation, the planetary system responsible for distributing heat across Earth. That disruption matches exactly what climate records show during the Younger Dryas. The planet entered a sudden freeze period lasting roughly 1,200 years. Meanwhile, ecosystems collapsed. Around the same period, mammoths disappeared, mastodons vanished, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and dozens of megafaunal species went extinct across multiple continents. The standard explanation blames overhunting and climate instability. But extinction rates were too rapid in many regions. Something accelerated the process. Then researchers found another anomaly. At archaeological sites dated to the Younger Dryas onset, there are signs of extreme thermal events, melted materials, carbon-rich burn layers, and evidence of massive fires occurring simultaneously across enormous distances. At Abu Huraira in Syria, one of the earliest known farming settlements on Earth, scientists identified melted glass and minerals requiring temperatures far beyond anything ancient humans could produce. The village appears to have been exposed to temperatures comparable to modern industrial furnaces, roughly 12,800 years ago, exactly when the catastrophe began. And this is where the official narrative starts breaking down. Because if Earth experienced a civilization-ending disaster at the end of the Ice Age, then we have to ask a dangerous question. What exactly existed before it? Göbekli Tepe creates a serious problem for mainstream archaeology. Discovered in southeastern Turkey and dated to roughly 9,600 BCE, the site predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years, and the Great Pyramid by nearly 7,000 years. Yet it displays astonishing sophistication. Massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons, precise astronomical alignments, advanced symbolic carvings, complex planning and organization. According to conventional history, the builders were primitive hunter-gatherers. But hunter-gatherers are not supposed to coordinate large-scale megalithic engineering projects, especially not immediately after surviving a global climate catastrophe. Even stranger, the oldest layers at Göbekli Tepe are the most advanced. Later construction becomes simpler and less refined. Civilizations normally improve over time. At Göbekli Tepe, the opposite happened, as though the earliest builders inherited knowledge they only partially understood, and over generations, that knowledge degraded. Some researchers believe the site encoded astronomical information connected to the Younger Dryas event itself. One pillar, often called the Vulture Stone, appears to depict constellations and celestial alignments associated with approximately 10,950 BCE, directly overlapping proposed dates for the impact event. If true, this would mean ancient people were recording cosmic events with extraordinary precision over 11,000 years ago. That should not be possible according to the accepted timeline, unless they inherited that knowledge from an older civilization. And that is where the Anunnaki enter the story. Ancient Sumerian texts describe beings who descended from the heavens and brought humanity knowledge. Astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, kingship, architecture. Mainstream historians interpret these stories symbolically. Alternative researchers argue something else entirely. Not gods, survivors. The fragmented memory of a lost civilization mistaken for divine beings after the collapse. Because after a catastrophe large enough to erase coastlines, destroy cities, and collapse populations, even advanced humans could easily become gods in the eyes of survivors who lost everything. And if that happened once before, human history may not be a straight line of progress. It may be a recovery. If this topic changes the way you see ancient history, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us what you think in the comments. Because the deeper we go into the Younger Dryas mystery, the stranger the evidence becomes. If the Younger Dryas catastrophe really destroyed an advanced Ice Age civilization, one question becomes unavoidable. Where are the ruins? The answer may be simpler than most people realize. They are underwater. During the peak of the last Ice Age, sea levels were more than 120 meters lower than today. Entire continental shelves that are now submerged were once habitable coastal plains. These regions would have been the most valuable land on Earth, fertile, resource-rich, and ideal for early settlements. Modern civilization also concentrates near coastlines. So would ancient civilization. When the Younger Dryas ended and ice sheets melted rapidly, those coastlines vanished beneath rising oceans. This is not speculation. It is geology. Between roughly 12,000 and 7,000 BCE, global sea levels rose dramatically. Some periods experienced what scientists call meltwater pulses, sudden surges where oceans may have risen several meters within centuries. Entire inhabited regions disappeared permanently. If sophisticated settlements existed there, they would now lie beneath the sea. And increasingly, researchers are finding anomalies exactly where they should be. One of the most controversial examples lies off the coast of India in the Gulf of Kambat. In 2001, sonar scans revealed massive geometric formations beneath roughly 40 meters of water. Researchers identified rectilinear patterns, possible walls, grid-like layouts, and structures extending across large areas of the sea floor. Artifacts recovered nearby included worked stone, pottery fragments, and materials potentially associated with human activity. The dating immediately caused controversy. Some samples appeared far older than expected, possibly older than 9,000 BCE. If verified, the site would predate the Indus Valley civilization by thousands of years. Mainstream archaeologists challenged the conclusions, arguing currents could have displaced artifacts and that sonar imagery alone was insufficient proof. But the problem remains. Why are there apparently organized geometric structures beneath an area that was dry land during the Younger Dryas? India is not alone. Near Yonaguni Island off the coast of Japan, divers discovered enormous underwater stone formations in 1986. The site contains massive terraces, flat platforms, stair-like features, sharp angles, and what appear to be carved sections. Some geologists argue the structures are natural sandstone formations shaped by tectonic fracturing. Others disagree. Marine geologist Masaaki Kimura spent years studying the site and concluded portions may have been modified by humans. The key issue is timing. During the Younger Dryas period, Yonaguni's underwater structures would have been above sea level. If humans altered them before submersion, the site would date back to the Ice Age. Again, far earlier than mainstream timelines comfortably allow. Then there is Doggerland. Today, the North Sea separates Britain from mainland Europe. But during the Ice Age, this entire region was dry land, a massive territory inhabited by both animals and humans. Archaeologists now know Doggerland supported forests, rivers, lakes, and human populations for thousands of years. Fishing trawlers have recovered ancient tools, mammoth remains, human bones, and evidence of settlement from beneath the sea floor. Then the flooding began. As glaciers melted, Doggerland slowly drowned. Around 6,200 BCE, the Storegga submarine landslide off Norway triggered a gigantic tsunami that likely devastated the remaining populations. An entire world disappeared beneath the ocean. And because sea level rise happened globally, the same process occurred almost everywhere. This matters because mainstream archaeology is overwhelmingly land-based. We build our understanding of prehistory using the small fraction of ancient terrain still above water. But if advanced coastal settlements existed before the Younger Dryas, most of their infrastructure would now be inaccessible beneath continental shelves worldwide. We may literally be searching in the wrong places. And there is another problem. Even on land, catastrophic flooding destroys context. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis predicts continent-scale sediment redistribution. Floods carrying ice, rock, mud, and debris would bury settlements beneath meters of sediment. That is exactly what researchers keep finding. At many ancient sites, the oldest occupation layers appear suddenly separated by flood deposits, erosion boundaries, or unexplained destruction horizons. Some archaeologists now suspect major portions of human prehistory remain physically buried beneath later geological layers. This brings us to Egypt. Because the Great Sphinx may contain one of the strongest clues that civilization is older than officially admitted. The Sphinx erosion debate began with geologist Robert Schoch in the 1990s. Schoch noticed something strange about the weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure walls. The erosion appeared vertical and rounded, consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall. Not wind erosion, not desert sand abrasion. Water. The problem is that Egypt has been hyper-arid for thousands of years. To produce erosion of that scale, the region would need sustained rainfall over long periods. Paleoclimate evidence suggests such wet conditions existed near the end of the Pleistocene and early Holocene, around the Younger Dryas transition, potentially before dynastic Egypt even existed. If the core structure of the Sphinx is truly that old, it changes everything. Because it would imply large-scale stone construction existed thousands of years before the accepted birth of civilization. And the Sphinx is not the only anomaly at Giza. The pyramids themselves contain extraordinary mathematical and astronomical precision. The Great Pyramid aligns to true north with an error margin of only a fraction of a degree. Its dimensions encode relationships associated with Earth's circumference and geometric constants. Internal chambers show evidence of acoustic properties researchers still do not fully understand. Even today, engineers debate exactly how the structure was built. Ancient Egyptian records never clearly describe the pyramid construction process. That absence is suspicious. It is almost as though the Egyptians inherited something already ancient. This idea appears repeatedly in Egyptian tradition itself. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, a mythic age before dynastic civilization, when divine beings ruled and sacred knowledge was established. Mainstream interpretation treats this symbolically. Alternative researchers see something else, a cultural memory of a lost predecessor civilization. And this is where the Anunnaki hypothesis intersects with archaeology again. Sumerian king lists describe rulers existing before a great flood. These kings supposedly reigned for impossibly long periods and governed advanced cities before catastrophe destroyed the old world. Most historians dismiss the accounts as mythology, but ancient myths become far more interesting when multiple civilizations independently describe the same sequence: advanced beings, a golden age, a flood, the destruction of civilization, then survivors rebuilding. The consistency is difficult to ignore, especially because the geological evidence increasingly confirms that around 12,800 years ago, humanity really did experience a global catastrophe severe enough to permanently alter civilization's trajectory. The question is no longer whether something happened. The question is how much was lost, and whether fragments of that lost world are still waiting beneath the oceans. If you're enjoying this investigation into the Younger Dryas mystery, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Do you think humanity is rediscovering a forgotten chapter of its own history? Or are these just coincidences we desperately want to connect? One of the biggest weaknesses in the official timeline of civilization is not the lack of evidence. It is the existence of evidence in the wrong order. Again and again, archaeologists encounter sites that appear far too sophisticated for their supposed age. Precision stonework before metal tools, astronomical alignments before formal mathematics, monumental engineering before organized states. The standard explanation is always the same. Primitive people somehow achieved extraordinary results through gradual experimentation. But the archaeological sequence often suggests the opposite. Knowledge appears suddenly, then declines. Göbekli Tepe is one example, but there are many more. In Peru, the polygonal stonework at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo remains difficult to explain even with modern engineering equipment. Some stones weigh over 100 tons. Many contain interlocking joints so precise that blades cannot fit between them. The fitting accuracy is extraordinary. More importantly, the lower and supposedly older sections are often the most advanced. Later civilizations built cruder structures directly on top of earlier foundations. The same pattern appears in Egypt. The oldest megalithic cores frequently display the highest precision, while later dynastic additions become less sophisticated. This is not how technological development normally works. If civilization evolves linearly, construction techniques should improve with time. Instead, many ancient sites suggest inherited knowledge gradually degraded. That possibility changes everything, because it implies the first known civilizations may not have invented advanced engineering. They may have inherited fragments of it. Researchers studying ancient megalithic architecture have identified recurring characteristics appearing across multiple continents. Astronomical alignment, acoustic resonance, geometric encoding, extreme cardinal orientation precision, massive stone transport without clear tool evidence. And these similarities appear in cultures officially considered disconnected. Egypt, Peru, Turkey, Indonesia, Cambodia, Malta, Mexico. Different languages, different eras, same architectural obsessions. Some structures even appear aligned to celestial events associated with the precession of Earth's axis, an astronomical cycle lasting roughly 26,000 years. Tracking precession requires extremely long-term observations. Civilizations cannot discover this in a few generations. They need centuries or millennia of accumulated astronomical records. Yet ancient cultures possessed this knowledge astonishingly early. The question becomes obvious. Where did it come from? Mainstream archaeology assumes independent invention. Alternative researchers suggest surviving knowledge from a much older source. And this is where the Younger Dryas becomes critically important. Because if civilization existed before the catastrophe, almost all evidence of it would have been destroyed in exactly the places civilization develops best. Coastlines, river deltas, fertile lowlands. Areas now submerged or buried, but there may still be indirect traces. Ancient maps provide one of the strangest examples. In 1513, Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis created a world map compiled from older source materials. The map accurately depicts portions of South America with surprising precision for its era. But the real controversy involves Antarctica. Some researchers argue sections of the map appear to show the Antarctic coastline without ice coverage. That should be impossible. Antarctica has been ice-covered for thousands of years. Critics argue the interpretation is flawed and that the coastline resemblance is coincidental. But the deeper issue remains unresolved. Why do multiple ancient maps sometimes appear to contain geographic knowledge difficult to explain for their time? The Oronteus Phineus map from 1531 shows another strangely detailed southern continent. Charles Hapgood later proposed that some ancient cartographic knowledge may derive from much older source civilizations existing before major sea level rise. Most historians reject the conclusion, but the mystery never fully disappeared. Then there are the ancient legends themselves. Nearly every civilization preserves stories about divine teachers arriving after catastrophe. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu. In Egypt, the followers of Horus. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl. In the Andes, Viracocha. These figures share recurring characteristics. They emerge after destruction. They bring agriculture, astronomy, architecture, writing, and law. They are often associated with the sea or with celestial origins. Then they disappear. Mainstream scholarship categorizes these stories as mythology. But mythology becomes more interesting when combined with geological catastrophe. Because after a civilization collapses, survivors with advanced knowledge would appear almost supernatural to less organized populations. Imagine surviving a global disaster with retained knowledge of astronomy, engineering, navigation, and agriculture, while surrounding societies are struggling simply to survive. You would become a legend, and over generations, memory would transform teachers into gods. This may explain the Anunnaki traditions more rationally than either literal extraterrestrials or pure fiction. The Sumerians described the Anunnaki as beings associated with the heavens who established civilization itself. They taught kingship, measurement, agriculture, writing, sacred order. Alternative researchers interpret this literally as contact with non-human beings. But another possibility exists. The Anunnaki stories may preserve distorted memories of elite survivors from a pre-catastrophe civilization, whose technological and scientific knowledge seemed divine to post-collapse societies. That interpretation aligns surprisingly well with what we know about historical memory. Traumatized civilizations mythologize the past. Real events become symbolic. Technical knowledge becomes sacred narrative. Disaster becomes divine punishment. And survivors become gods. Even Plato's Atlantis account fits this structure. Critics dismiss Atlantis because Plato wrote philosophically, not historically. But his timeline is striking. He places Atlantis roughly 9,000 years before Solon. That corresponds closely to the Younger Dryas period. More importantly, Atlantis is not described merely as a city. It is described as an advanced maritime civilization, destroyed suddenly by earthquakes and floods in a single day and night of misfortune. That sounds remarkably similar to a large-scale impact event triggering tsunamis and crustal instability. And Plato claimed the story originated from Egyptian priests preserving records far older than Greek civilization itself. Whether Atlantis existed exactly as described is almost irrelevant. What matters is the recurring pattern. Again and again, ancient cultures remember. A previous age, advanced knowledge, catastrophe from the sky, flooding, then reconstruction. The consistency is difficult to explain away as coincidence, especially because modern geology now confirms Earth really did experience a severe global disruption around the exact period these myths describe. And the evidence continues growing. At Abu Huraira in Syria, researchers discovered signs of temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius at the Younger Dryas boundary layer. Melted minerals, glassified materials, and impact indicators suggest a cosmic airburst event directly affected the settlement. At multiple North American sites, black mat layers associated with the Younger Dryas contain elevated platinum concentrations, one of the strongest markers for extraterrestrial impact material. In Greenland ice cores, spikes in ammonium and nitrate suggest enormous biomass burning episodes occurred near the Younger Dryas onset. The atmosphere itself changed. Entire ecosystems collapsed. This was not a local disaster. It was planetary. And if advanced coastal societies existed beforehand, they would have faced simultaneous floods, fires, crop failures, climate collapse, and population fragmentation within a relatively short period. Civilization would not simply decline. It would shatter. Most survivors would lose access to accumulated knowledge within generations. Libraries burn. Trade networks collapse. Specialized labor disappears. Scientific continuity breaks. History resets. That may explain the single strangest fact in ancient history. Why civilization appears suddenly already mature. Because perhaps it wasn't humanity's beginning, only the beginning of the recovery. If this series is making you rethink ancient history, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below. If evidence of a lost civilization were finally proven beyond doubt, do you think the academic world would accept it or resist it? If a technologically sophisticated civilization existed before the Younger Dryas catastrophe, then traces of its knowledge should appear in the civilizations that emerged afterward. And that is exactly what we find. The earliest known civilizations did not behave like cultures inventing everything for the first time. They behaved like cultures inheriting systems they already considered ancient. Take Sumer. By roughly 3500 BCE, the Sumerians already possessed organized cities, complex religious structures, standardized measurement systems, advanced irrigation, astronomy, mathematics, legal administration, and one of the earliest writing systems on Earth. There is no visible developmental ramp, no long experimental phase. Civilization appears in Mesopotamia already functioning at high complexity. Even more strange, the Sumerians themselves never claimed to invent civilization. They said it was given to them. Their texts repeatedly describe divine beings called the Anunnaki and the Apkallu, figures associated with sacred knowledge and the foundations of organized society. According to Sumerian tradition, kingship descended from heaven. This phrase appears constantly in the earliest inscriptions. Mainstream historians interpret this symbolically, referring to divine legitimacy. But the symbolism itself may preserve something older. Because many ancient cultures describe civilization not as a human invention, but as recovered knowledge transmitted by survivors or gods after a catastrophe. The Sumerian king list becomes especially interesting in this context. The text divides rulers into two periods: before the flood, after the flood. Before the flood, kings supposedly ruled for impossibly long durations. Then catastrophe struck. Civilization collapsed. Kingship vanished temporarily before being re-established afterward. Historians dismiss the enormous reign lengths as mythological exaggeration. But the structure itself matters more than the numbers. The Sumerians clearly believed an older world existed before a devastating flood event, and they were not alone. Ancient Egypt preserved similar traditions. The Egyptians spoke of a remote era known as Zep Tepi, the first time. According to temple inscriptions, this was a primordial age when divine rulers established the sacred order of civilization. Again, mainstream scholarship treats this cosmologically. Yet Egyptian priestly traditions repeatedly suggest that much knowledge originated in a forgotten pre-dynastic past. Some of the earliest Egyptian structures also raise uncomfortable questions. The granite boxes inside the Serapeum at Saqqara are one example. Each box weighs roughly 70 to 100 tons and was carved from extremely hard granite with astonishing precision. Internal surfaces are remarkably flat. Corners approach exact right angles, and tolerances appear far beyond what many researchers believe Bronze Age tools should easily achieve. Even modern machinists studying the boxes have questioned how such precision was produced. Officially, they were burial containers for sacred Apis bulls. But the engineering remains difficult to explain. The same issue appears with unfinished stonework at Aswan. There, enormous granite blocks show signs of extraction methods still debated today. Some cuts appear unnaturally precise, leading alternative researchers to speculate about lost machining techniques. Mainstream archaeology attributes the work to pounding stones, copper tools, and immense labor. Possible? Perhaps. But the precision gap remains controversial. Then there is Baalbek in Lebanon. The site contains some of the largest stone blocks ever used in construction. The trilithon stones each weigh roughly 800 tons. Nearby quarry blocks exceed 1,000 tons. For comparison, modern cranes struggle with weights of this scale even today. Official explanations propose ramps, rollers, manpower, and ancient engineering ingenuity. But there is still no consensus reconstruction demonstrating exactly how such stones were transported and positioned with ancient technology. And Baalbek may be older than the Roman structures built atop it. Again, the same pattern emerges. Later civilizations inheriting and repurposing earlier megalithic foundations. Peru presents similar mysteries. At Ollantaytambo, massive stones transported from distant quarries were fitted together with extraordinary precision on steep, mountainous terrain. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, stone blocks contain geometric cuts so precise that some researchers compared them to machine work. Mainstream archaeologists reject claims of advanced lost technology. But even skeptics acknowledge the engineering sophistication is remarkable. The real mystery is not whether ancient humans were intelligent. Of course they were. The mystery is why so much highly advanced knowledge appears so suddenly in the archaeological record after the Younger Dryas period. Astronomy is one of the strongest examples. Ancient civilizations tracked celestial cycles with astonishing accuracy. The Egyptians aligned structures to cardinal north with precision difficult to achieve even with modern instruments. The Maya calculated planetary movements with extraordinary detail. Mesopotamian astronomers monitored eclipses and long-duration celestial cycles. Many ancient systems also appear aware of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis across roughly 26,000 years. Detecting precession requires observations spanning many generations. This implies long-term astronomical continuity. But where did that continuity survive if civilization supposedly emerged from primitive tribes only a few thousand years earlier? This is where Göbekli Tepe becomes critically important again. Some researchers believe the site encoded astronomical warnings related to the Younger Dryas impact itself. The vulture stone contains symbols potentially corresponding to constellations and celestial alignments dated computationally to around 10,950 BCE. The proposed interpretation remains controversial. But if correct, it suggests ancient observers tracked the sky with incredible sophistication during or before the catastrophe period. And perhaps they had reason to, because Earth still crosses debris streams associated with ancient cometary fragmentation events. One candidate is the Taurid meteor stream. Astronomers increasingly study the Taurids because they contain unusually large objects capable of regional devastation if impacts occurred. Some researchers have proposed the Younger Dryas event may have originated from a giant fragmented comet associated with this stream, meaning the same orbital debris field may still intersect Earth today. This possibility changes the meaning of ancient sky mythology. Throughout history, civilizations obsessed over celestial cycles. Comets were feared. Sky omens were treated seriously. Many megalithic structures appear designed partly for astronomical monitoring. Modern people often dismiss this as primitive superstition. But if an earlier civilization experienced near extinction from a cosmic event, preserving astronomical awareness would become a survival priority. Watching the sky would no longer be religion. It would be disaster prevention. And suddenly, ancient myths describing fire from heaven sound far less symbolic. Because geological evidence increasingly suggests that is exactly what happened. But there is another layer to this mystery. Because some ancient traditions describe the Anunnaki not merely as teachers, but as rulers, beings who controlled knowledge itself. And if fragments of a pre-catastrophe elite survived the Younger Dryas collapse, they may have become the foundation of early priesthoods and ruling classes across multiple civilizations. Not extraterrestrials, not magic, just the final remnants of a world technologically superior to the shattered societies around them. A world that disappeared beneath floodwaters, sediment, and time. And the deeper researchers dig into prehistory, the more evidence seems to suggest humanity's past is far older and far stranger than we were taught. If you're enjoying the series, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below. Do you think ancient civilizations inherited lost knowledge from before the Younger Dryas? Or are modern researchers seeing patterns that were never really there? By the end of the Younger Dryas period, something unusual begins happening across the planet. Human populations stop behaving like scattered survival groups and start organizing around monumental construction. Almost simultaneously, Turkey, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Andes, Mesoamerica, Indonesia, Malta. Massive stone structures appear with mathematical precision, astronomical orientation, and symbolic systems far beyond what archaeologists once believed possible for early societies. And one detail connects many of them. The sky. Ancient monuments are obsessed with celestial alignment. The Great Pyramid aligns almost perfectly to true north. Newgrange in Ireland illuminates precisely during the winter solstice. Mayan temples track Venus cycles. Göbekli Tepe may encode constellations. The Temple of Karnak aligns with solar events. Angkor Wat mirrors celestial geometry. This is not random architecture. It is systematic astronomical engineering. And the precision becomes difficult to explain if civilization truly began only a few thousand years earlier. Because astronomy at this level requires long-term observational continuity. Tracking solstices is simple. Tracking precession is not. Precession is the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis over approximately 25,772 years. The stars shift gradually over millennia. Detecting this movement requires highly accurate records maintained across generations. Yet evidence suggests ancient cultures were aware of it. Some researchers argue the Egyptian zodiac traditions encoded precessional ages. Others point to correlations between ancient temple alignments and stellar positions that only fit earlier epochs. The implications are enormous. It would mean at least some ancient knowledge systems originated much earlier than official chronologies allow. Then there is the Orion correlation theory. Proposed by Robert Bauval in the 1990s, the theory suggests the layout of the three pyramids at Giza mirrors the belt stars of Orion. Critics argue the alignment is approximate and interpretive. But the more controversial element involves timing. When researchers calculated stellar positions backward using astronomical software, the best match aligned not with dynastic Egypt, but roughly 10,500 BCE, near the Younger Dryas transition. This date appears repeatedly in alternative chronology research. Coincidence? Possibly. But the pattern keeps returning. Even more curious is the role of Sirius. Ancient Egyptians attached enormous importance to Sirius, whose heliacal rising marked the Nile flood cycle. The Dogon people of Mali also preserved highly unusual traditions regarding Sirius. In the 20th century, anthropologists recorded Dogon claims describing Sirius as part of a complex star system involving an invisible companion star. That companion, Sirius B, is a dense white dwarf invisible to the naked eye. Modern astronomy confirmed its existence in the 19th century. Supporters of ancient advanced knowledge theories argue this proves lost astronomical sophistication. Skeptics counter that later contamination from modern sources likely influenced the Dogon accounts. The debate continues, but it highlights a larger issue. Ancient cultures consistently possessed more astronomical sophistication than expected, and astronomy was not their only advanced field. Ancient mathematics also appears unexpectedly mature. The Babylonians used complex numerical systems capable of advanced calculations. Egyptian geometry displayed remarkable practical precision. Mayan calendars tracked astronomical cycles with extraordinary accuracy. The question is not whether ancient humans were intelligent. Of course they were. The question is how organized scientific systems emerged so rapidly after the chaos of the Younger Dryas, especially because early civilizations repeatedly described knowledge as inherited, not invented. In Mesopotamia, sacred knowledge was associated with the me, divine principles governing civilization itself. Writing, measurement, law, architecture, craftsmanship. These were portrayed almost like recovered packages of knowledge transmitted after catastrophe. Again, mythology may preserve memory in symbolic form. And this becomes even more interesting when examining ancient construction itself. Some megalithic structures appear engineered for acoustic resonance. Inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, certain frequencies create standing wave effects. Researchers studying ancient acoustics have documented resonance properties in multiple sacred sites worldwide. At Chavin de Huántar in Peru, underground chambers manipulate sound in psychologically powerful ways. At Malta's Hippodrome, low-frequency resonance dramatically alters human perception. Some alternative researchers speculate ancient builders understood acoustic engineering far better than officially recognized. Mainstream archaeology remains cautious, arguing ritual architecture naturally produces resonance effects. But once again, the sophistication is difficult to ignore. Then there is the issue of impossible stone transport. At Baalbek, quarry stones weighing over 1,000 tons were somehow moved and elevated. At the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, the intended block would have weighed roughly 1,200 tons. At Puma Punku, andesite blocks feature complex geometric cuts and drilled holes. At Saksai Huaman, Massive stones interlock with earthquake-resistant precision. Ancient engineers clearly understood structural stability extraordinarily well, and they often built to survive seismic activity. Some polygonal walls in Peru have endured earthquakes that destroyed later colonial buildings placed nearby. This raises another possibility. What if post-catastrophe civilizations deliberately built for resilience because they remembered geological instability? Because if the Younger Dryas impact triggered floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, and climate collapse, survivors would prioritize permanence. Stone survives. Wood burns. Records decay. But megaliths endure. And perhaps that explains why the earliest monumental structures seem obsessed with astronomical alignment, sacred geometry, and massive stone construction. They were not merely temples. They may have been memory systems, a way to preserve knowledge through deep time after civilization nearly vanished. And this is where the Anunnaki narrative evolves again. Ancient texts do not just describe divine teachers. They describe beings connected to celestial cycles and cosmic order. Some researchers interpret this literally as extraterrestrial intervention. Others propose a more grounded explanation. The priesthoods of early civilizations inherited fragments of pre-catastrophe scientific knowledge and encoded it into religious symbolism. Over thousands of years, technical memory transformed into mythology. Astronomy became astrology. Engineering became sacred architecture. Scientists became gods. And catastrophe became divine judgment. This process happens repeatedly in human history. After societal collapse, surviving knowledge often becomes ritualized because the underlying science is lost while the procedures remain. People remember what works long after forgetting why it works. That may explain why ancient traditions preserve strangely accurate astronomical and mathematical systems alongside supernatural narratives. The technical framework disappeared. The symbolic memory survived. And there is one final detail that deeply unsettles some researchers. Many ancient cultures believed civilization existed in cycles, not a straight line of progress. Ages rise, ages collapse, then civilization rebuilds again. The Maya, the Hindus, the Greeks, the Aztecs. Even Egyptian traditions imply repeated world ages separated by catastrophe. Modern civilization assumes linear advancement, but geological history does not support stability. Earth has experienced supervolcanoes, impacts, rapid climate shifts, magnetic excursions, mega tsunamis. Civilization may be far more fragile than we want to believe. And if an advanced society really disappeared during the Younger Dryas, humanity's greatest misconception may not be about the past. It may be believing that collapse cannot happen again. If you're enjoying the series, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Do you think ancient myths are distorted fiction or fragmented memories of real events humanity was never supposed to forget? If ancient myths are preserving distorted memories of the Younger Dryas catastrophe, then the same core story should appear globally, even in civilizations separated by oceans. And it does. Not occasionally. Constantly. Flood myths exist in nearly every major human tradition on Earth. But the similarities go far beyond simple flooding. Again and again, the stories describe the same sequence. A previous age of civilization, corruption or imbalance, fire or destruction from the massive flooding, a small number of survivors, then reconstruction. The Sumerians told of Utnapishtim, surviving a divine flood that destroyed humanity. The Akkadians preserve similar accounts in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Hebrew Bible describes Noah. Greek mythology describes Deucalion and Pyrrha surviving Zeus's flood. Hindu texts describe Manu preserving life through a cosmic deluge. The Maya spoke of earlier worlds destroyed before the current age. Aztec traditions described repeated suns, or civilizations, ending through catastrophe. Chinese myths describe great floods devastating early civilization. Indigenous North American traditions contain stories of fire in the sky darkness, floods, and surviving ancestors. Australian Aboriginal oral traditions preserve memories of coastlines that flooded thousands of years ago. Stories modern geology later confirmed correspond to post-ice age sea level rise. This is extremely important. Some Aboriginal flood traditions may be over 7,000 years old, preserved orally across hundreds of generations. That proves human cultures can preserve memories of ancient environmental catastrophes far longer than previously assumed. Now apply that globally. If the Younger Dryas truly caused civilization-scale destruction, its memory could absolutely survive through myth, especially if survivors considered the event sacred, traumatic, and civilization-defining. Then there are the details within the myths themselves. Many describe the sky behaving abnormally. The sun darkens. Fire rains down. The earth shakes. Oceans rise suddenly. These descriptions align surprisingly well with the physics of a major impact event. A fragmented comet entering Earth's atmosphere would produce intense atmospheric heating, shock waves, widespread fires, dust injection, and tsunami generation. To pre-scientific observers, it would appear apocalyptic. Exactly the kind of event civilizations would mythologize for millennia. One particularly interesting example comes from ancient Egypt. The Edfu temple inscriptions describe a primeval homeland destroyed by a great flood and an enemy serpent associated with chaos and destruction. Some alternative researchers argue these stories preserve memories of an earlier catastrophe affecting a precursor civilization. Mainstream Egyptology rejects this interpretation, but the recurring flood catastrophe motif remains difficult to ignore. Then there is Plato. Most people think Atlantis was simply a philosophical metaphor, but Plato's account contains several unusual details. First, he claims the story came from Egyptian priests. Second, he dates Atlantis to roughly 9,000 years before Solon. That places its destruction near 9,600 BCE. Again, directly overlapping the Younger Dryas transition. Third, Atlantis is described as an advanced maritime civilization destroyed suddenly by earthquakes and floods. Not gradually, not through war, catastrophically. Critics correctly point out that Plato mixed philosophy with storytelling, but that does not automatically mean the underlying memory was fictional. Historical events often become mythologized over time. Troy was once considered mythical. Then archaeologists found it. Massive floods described in ancient Near Eastern texts were once dismissed as legend. Geology later confirmed enormous regional flood events occurred repeatedly in antiquity. Myths frequently contain distorted historical cores. The challenge is separating symbolism from memory. And increasingly, Younger Dryas research gives those memories geological context. Because around 12,800 years ago, Earth really did experience abrupt climate reversal, rapid flooding, megafaunal extinction, massive wildfires, possible cosmic impacts. population disruption. That combination would permanently scar human memory. Then there are the mysterious culture bringers. After catastrophe myths, civilizations repeatedly describe figures who arrive carrying knowledge. Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Viracocha in the Andes, the Apkallu in Mesopotamia, the followers of Horus in Egypt. These figures teach agriculture, astronomy, architecture, calendars, mathematics, morality, and statecraft. Then they leave. This pattern appears globally. Mainstream scholarship usually interprets these stories symbolically as archetypes of civilization itself. Alternative theories suggest extraterrestrials, but there may be a more historically grounded explanation. Survivors. If fragments of a sophisticated pre-catastrophe civilization endured while most populations collapsed into survival conditions, those survivors would possess overwhelming advantages: agricultural knowledge, engineering, navigation, astronomy, medicine, social organization. To traumatize post-collapse populations, such individuals would appear godlike, especially over generations of oral transmission. The transformation from survivor-teacher to divine being would be almost inevitable. And this idea may explain one of the strangest features of ancient civilizations. Why early priesthoods often guarded knowledge so aggressively. In Egypt, sacred geometry and astronomy were controlled by temple elites. In Mesopotamia, writing itself initially remained tied to priestly administration. In Mesoamerica, astronomical calculation was associated with sacred authority. Knowledge became power. Possibly because surviving fragments of older systems were incredibly valuable after societal collapse, and perhaps increasingly misunderstood. Over centuries, practical knowledge transforms into ritual. Engineering principles become sacred mysteries. Astronomy becomes astrology. Scientific cycles become divine calendars. The original context disappears. Only fragments survive. This process is visible even in modern history. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, portions of engineering, medicine, and scientific knowledge disappeared for centuries in parts of Europe. Complex infrastructure decayed. Literacy declined. Trade networks fractured. Now imagine a collapse thousands of times larger. Global coastlines erased. Population centers destroyed. Climate destabilized. Libraries burned. Entire knowledge systems lost. Humanity would not restart cleanly. It would rebuild unevenly from fragments. And those fragments would eventually become myth. Then there is another uncomfortable issue. Many ancient traditions explicitly describe previous world ages destroyed before the current one. Hindu cosmology contains repeating yugas, cyclical ages of rise and decline. The Maya described earlier creations ending in catastrophe. Greek philosophers discussed recurring destructions through fire and flood. Even some Native American traditions describe multiple worlds preceding the present age. Modern culture views history linearly. Ancient cultures often did not. They believed civilization repeatedly collapses and returns. Geology may support them more than we realize. Because Earth is not stable on civilizational timescales, impacts happen. Supervolcanoes erupt. Magnetic fields fluctuate. Solar activity changes. Climate can shift violently. The Younger Dryas may simply be the most recent near-extinction event humanity partially remembers. And if that is true, ancient myths are not primitive fantasy. They are warning systems. Encoded memories passed across thousands of years by survivors, terrified future generations would forget what happened. The disturbing possibility is that we already did. If this series is changing the way you think about history, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below. If humanity survived one global catastrophe before, how prepared do you think modern civilization really is for another one? For decades, critics of the Younger Dryas catastrophe theory argued there was no physical evidence of an advanced civilization before the end of the Ice Age. That argument is becoming harder to defend, because researchers are now finding anomalies not only underwater or inside myths, but buried directly beneath the foundations of known civilization. And some of the strongest evidence comes from geology itself. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis was once considered fringe science. Today, parts of it are increasingly supported by peer-reviewed research. In 2018, a major study published in the Journal of Geology analyzed samples from dozens of Younger Dryas boundary sites across 4 continents. Researchers identified platinum anomalies, nanodiamonds, magnetic microspherules, high-temperature melt glass, large-scale soot deposits. The distribution was global, the timing was synchronized, and the evidence strongly suggested a major extraterrestrial event near 12,800 years ago. Then came Abu Huraira. Located in modern Syria, Abu Huraira was one of the earliest known agricultural settlements on Earth. Archaeologists excavating the site discovered evidence of an extreme thermal event exactly at the Younger Dryas boundary layer. Melted glass, vaporized minerals, iron-rich spherules, materials requiring temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius. No ancient human technology could produce that kind of heat. Researchers concluded the settlement was likely struck by fragments or shock effects associated with a cosmic airburst event. In other words, people living through the Younger Dryas may have literally witnessed fire from the sky, exactly as ancient myths describe. Then there is the Carolina Bays mystery. Across the eastern United States, thousands of elliptical depressions cover the landscape. For decades, scientists debated their origin. Some researchers propose they may relate to ejecta from impacts striking the Laurentide ice sheet during the Younger Dryas onset. The orientation patterns are difficult to explain through ordinary erosion alone. The debate remains unresolved, but again, the evidence keeps pointing toward large-scale catastrophic processes occurring at exactly the right time. And the timing matters more than anything, because civilization changes immediately afterward. Before the Younger Dryas, evidence for organized monumental civilization appears sparse and fragmented. Afterward, sophisticated societies emerge astonishingly fast. Agriculture expands, astronomy appears, permanent architecture spreads, megalithic construction explodes globally. Something accelerated human development, or perhaps something survived. One of the strongest clues comes from agriculture itself. The official story says humans gradually transitioned from foraging to farming through trial and error. But the archaeological record often looks more abrupt. At several early agricultural sites, domesticated crops appear surprisingly optimized from the beginning. Wheat is especially strange. Wild wheat is difficult to cultivate efficiently. Domesticated varieties require multiple genetic traits appearing together to become agriculturally practical. Yet in the Fertile Crescent, organized cultivation appears rapidly after the Younger Dryas period. This has led some researchers to propose that agriculture may not have been invented from scratch after the catastrophe. It may have been recovered. Stored seeds, preserved knowledge, surviving techniques. That possibility becomes more plausible when considering climate chaos during the Younger Dryas itself. The sudden cooling event would have devastated ecosystems and disrupted food chains globally. Hunter-gatherer populations facing instability would have enormous incentives to intensify food production. Survivors possessing prior agricultural knowledge would become critically important. And perhaps that explains why agricultural myths often describe farming as sacred knowledge gifted by divine beings. Again, the pattern repeats. Knowledge arrives after catastrophe. Then there is metallurgy. Conventional archaeology places advanced metallurgy thousands of years after the Younger Dryas. But several controversial finds complicate the timeline. At sites in Anatolia and the Middle East, evidence suggests humans experimented with metalworking surprisingly early. Some researchers argue isolated advanced techniques may have existed before accepted chronologies allow. Most archaeologists remain skeptical, but the broader issue persists. Ancient timelines are becoming increasingly unstable. Even genetics is complicating the story. Studies of ancient DNA show that major human population bottlenecks and migrations occurred around the end of the Ice Age. Entire populations disappeared. Others expanded rapidly. Human civilization after the Younger Dryas was not simply progressing. It was reorganizing after massive disruption. Then there are the megaliths themselves. Many ancient structures appear engineered with knowledge of geology and seismic stability. Polygonal masonry in Peru resists earthquakes remarkably well. Egyptian monuments were built on geologically stable plateaus. Göbekli Tepe sits on elevated terrain far from flood-prone coastlines. Some researchers suggest post-catastrophe builders deliberately selected resilient locations, not for symbolism, for survival. And suddenly, the obsession with stone makes sense. If earlier civilizations lost fragile infrastructure during floods and fires, survivors would prioritize permanence above all else. Stone survives catastrophe. That may explain why ancient civilizations invested enormous labor into structures seemingly excessive for their practical needs. The monuments were not only ceremonial, they were continuity systems, civilization anchors, knowledge storage designed to survive thousands of years. And perhaps some were warnings. This possibility becomes more disturbing when examining ancient astronomical traditions. Multiple civilizations tracked unusual celestial cycles with extraordinary seriousness. The Maya monitored Venus obsessively. Mesopotamian astronomers recorded cometary activity. Chinese astronomers documented guest stars and sky anomalies for millennia. Many cultures associated celestial events with destruction. Modern society often dismisses this as superstition. But if an earlier civilization nearly vanished because of a cosmic event, preserving astronomical awareness would become essential. You watch the sky if the sky once tried to kill you. And there is growing evidence Earth remains vulnerable. The Taurid meteor stream still intersects Earth's orbit. Astronomers studying the stream have identified large objects capable of regional or continental devastation. Some researchers believe the Younger Dryas event originated from fragmentation within this same cometary complex, meaning the danger never fully disappeared. Ancient civilizations may have remembered this, which changes the interpretation of many myths entirely. What if the gods were not supernatural beings, but survivors carrying scientific knowledge from before the catastrophe? What if sacred astronomy was originally disaster tracking? What if flood myths were historical memory? And what if humanity's oldest monuments were built not merely to honor the heavens, but to warn future generations never to stop watching them? Because if the Younger Dryas proved anything, it is this: civilization is far more fragile than we believe, and history may already contain the record of what happens when the sky changes everything. If you're enjoying the series, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us below. Do you think ancient civilizations encoded real scientific knowledge into myth and monument? Or are modern researchers reading too much into ancient symbolism? There is a question mainstream archaeology still struggles to answer convincingly. Why do the earliest civilizations appear already scientifically organized? Not primitive, not experimental, organized. Because when Sumer, Egypt, and the earliest megalithic cultures emerge, they already possess surprisingly mature systems of astronomy, geometry, agriculture, urban planning, calendar synchronization, long-distance trade, and most importantly, measurement. Measurement changes civilization completely. You cannot build pyramids, align monuments to celestial events, organize irrigation systems, or construct megalithic complexes without standardized units and mathematical consistency. Yet the earliest civilizations already had them. Ancient Egypt used sophisticated surveying methods capable of producing astonishing geometric precision. Mesopotamians developed advanced numerical systems based on sexagesimal mathematics. The reason modern humanity still divides circles into 360 degrees and hours into 60 minutes. These systems appear extremely early. Too early, according to some researchers. Then there is sacred geometry. Across ancient civilizations, certain mathematical ratios appear repeatedly. Pi approximations, golden ratio relationships, geometric harmonics, astronomical cycles encoded architecturally. Critics argue humans naturally discover efficient geometry. That is true, but the scale and consistency remain unusual, especially because many structures also appear linked to Earth itself. The Great Pyramid's dimensions correlate closely with planetary measurements. Its latitude aligns near the speed of light, coordinate coincidence often discussed in alternative research. Controversial, yes, but still widely debated. The pyramid also aligns almost perfectly with cardinal north, using methods not fully understood. To achieve this accuracy without modern instruments would require exceptional astronomical observation, and the Egyptians were not alone. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, the city layout appears astronomically organized. At Angkor Wat, temple dimensions correlate with celestial cycles. At Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, stone circles potentially aligned with solstices may predate dynastic civilization itself. Again and again, ancient societies appear obsessed with preserving cosmic order mathematically. Why? One possibility is religion. Another is survival. Because after a civilization-ending catastrophe linked to celestial events, astronomy becomes existential. Tracking the heavens becomes essential knowledge. Then there are the unexplained technological anomalies. The Baghdad battery is one famous example. Discovered near Baghdad and dating roughly to the Parthian period, the artifact consists of a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and iron rod. Some researchers proposed it could function as a primitive galvanic cell. Mainstream scholars remain skeptical and argue there is no definitive evidence it was used electrically. But the object demonstrates something important. Ancient technological capability is often underestimated. The same applies to Roman concrete. Modern engineers discovered that some Roman marine concrete structures survive seawater exposure better than many modern formulations. Ancient builders sometimes understood material science in ways later civilizations lost. Knowledge can disappear. That fact alone changes how we interpret prehistory. Because modern culture assumes technological progress is permanent. History says otherwise. The collapse of the Bronze Age destroyed major Mediterranean civilizations within decades. The fall of Rome erased infrastructure and engineering continuity across large parts of Europe. Mayan urban systems declined dramatically after societal fragmentation. Complex systems are fragile. Now imagine a collapse on a planetary scale. The Younger Dryas would not merely destroy cities, it would destroy continuity itself. Trade collapses, writing disappears, scientific institutions vanish, specialists die, survivors focus entirely on food, shelter, and security. Within generations, advanced knowledge becomes fragmented myth. This may explain one of the strangest archaeological patterns. The oldest traditions often contain the deepest cosmological sophistication. Ancient India provides a powerful example. The Vedic texts contain enormous cosmological timescales, astonishingly close to modern astronomical thinking. Some passages describe cyclic universes, immense epochs of time, and celestial mechanics in unexpectedly sophisticated ways. Alternative researchers sometimes exaggerate these connections, claiming impossible ancient technology. But even mainstream historians acknowledge the intellectual sophistication of early Vedic astronomy. Again, the issue is timing. Complex cosmological systems emerged surprisingly early after the Younger Dryas transition. Then there are the Vimanas. Ancient Sanskrit epics describe flying vehicles associated with gods and advanced beings. Most scholars interpret them mythologically. Alternative theorists interpret them literally as evidence of lost technology. The truth may be somewhere in between. Human societies often describe unfamiliar technology through symbolic language. Even modern witnesses struggle to describe advanced systems outside their conceptual framework. If survivors inherited fragmented technological memory after the Younger Dryas collapse, those memories could easily transform into supernatural narratives over centuries of oral transmission. A powered craft becomes a flying chariot. An engineer becomes a sky god. A scientific catastrophe becomes divine wrath. This process is historically normal, and the same pattern appears in Mesoamerica. Quetzalcoatl was associated not only with wisdom, but astronomy and calendar systems. Viracocha in the Andes was described as a civilizing figure emerging after destruction. The Sumerian Apkallu were semi-divine sages preserving sacred knowledge. Again and again. Catastrophe first, knowledge afterward. The sequence repeats globally. And this raises another disturbing possibility. What if ancient priesthoods were not merely religious institutions, but repositories of surviving technical knowledge? Temple complexes in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica often functioned simultaneously as astronomical observatories, administrative centers, storage systems, mathematical schools, ritual sites, knowledge preservation institutions. The overlap is striking, because after societal collapse, religion becomes one of the few systems capable of preserving information across generations. Sacred tradition stabilizes memory. This may explain why ancient knowledge was encoded symbolically rather than scientifically. The symbolic form survives cultural collapse better. Stories endure when textbooks do not. And perhaps that is exactly what happened after the Younger Dryas. The survivors encoded fragments of astronomy, mathematics, geology, and catastrophe memory into myth, monument, ritual, and sacred architecture. Not because they were primitive, but because symbolic transmission was the only reliable long-term storage system they had left. And over thousands of years, humanity forgot the original meaning. Until modern geology began rediscovering the catastrophe itself. Now the evidence is converging. Impact markers, abrupt climate collapse, global flooding, extinction waves, buried coastlines, ancient catastrophe myths, sudden emergence of organized civilization. The pieces increasingly fit together into a single possibility. Humanity may not be inventing civilization for the first time. We may be rebuilding from the ruins of the last one. And if that is true, then ancient history is not a story of primitive beginnings. It is a story of survival after near extinction. If you're enjoying the series, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below if evidence of a lost Ice Age civilization were finally discovered tomorrow. How much of modern history do you think would need to be rewritten? The deeper researchers investigate the Younger Dryas catastrophe, the more another question begins to emerge. Why is mainstream archaeology so resistant to rewriting the timeline? Because by now, the evidence for a major global catastrophe around 12,800 years ago is becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. Even critics of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis now acknowledge that something abrupt and severe happened at the end of the Ice Age. Climate records confirm it. Ice cores confirm it. Ocean sediment confirms it. Extinction patterns confirm it. The debate is no longer about whether Earth experienced sudden disruption. The debate is about how destructive it truly was, and whether human civilization was affected more deeply than modern history admits. Part of the resistance is understandable. Modern archaeology is built on gradualism, the idea that civilization evolves slowly through predictable developmental stages. Hunter-gatherers, villages, agriculture, cities, states, empires. The entire academic structure depends on this sequence. But the archaeological record increasingly refuses to behave that neatly. Göbekli Tepe appears too early. Megalithic precision appears too advanced. Astronomical sophistication appears too mature. Flood myths appear too globally consistent. Submerged coastlines appear too extensive. And ancient civilizations repeatedly claim their knowledge came from before, not from themselves. If a pre-Younger Dryas civilization existed, even regionally, it would force a fundamental reconstruction of human history. Not a minor correction, a complete rewrite. Because the implications extend far beyond archaeology. It would affect anthropology, religion, ancient chronology, migration theory, the origins of agriculture, the history of science, even our assumptions about technological progress. And institutions rarely embrace paradigm collapse quickly. Science changes through evidence, but also through generational acceptance. This has happened before. When Alfred Wegener proposed continental drift in the early 20th century, mainstream geology rejected him for decades. Today, plate tectonics is foundational science. When meteor impacts were proposed as the cause of dinosaur extinction, many scientists resisted the idea initially. Now the Chicxulub impact is widely accepted. Paradigms shift slowly, especially when careers, textbooks, and institutional authority are built around older models. And the Younger Dryas debate is particularly explosive because it intersects with fringe theories. Atlantis, ancient astronauts, the Anunnaki, lost civilizations. Many legitimate researchers avoid the topic entirely because they do not want association with sensationalism. That caution is understandable, but it creates another problem. Important evidence sometimes gets ignored simply because the surrounding discussion becomes controversial. Meanwhile, the discoveries continue. At Karahan Tepe in Turkey, archaeologists uncovered another massive pre-pottery megalithic site connected culturally to Göbekli Tepe. And there may be dozens more buried beneath the region. This suggests Göbekli Tepe was not isolated. It was part of a larger cultural system already capable of monumental architecture immediately after the Younger Dryas period. Again, the timing is extraordinary. Then, satellite imaging and LiDAR scanning began transforming archaeology itself. Entire hidden cities are now being discovered beneath jungles and sediment. In the Amazon, researchers identified enormous geometric earthworks invisible from ground level. In Cambodia, LiDAR revealed vast urban networks surrounding Angkor, previously hidden by vegetation. In Central America, massive Mayan settlement systems emerged from beneath forest cover. The lesson is important. Civilizations can remain invisible for centuries if buried properly. Now imagine what remains hidden beneath continental shelves submerged after Ice Age flooding, or beneath Younger Dryas sediment deposits, or beneath modern cities built continuously for thousands of years. We may have explored only a fraction of human prehistory. And then there is the DNA evidence. Genetic studies increasingly reveal that ancient human populations experienced severe disruptions near the end of the Ice Age. Population bottlenecks, rapid migrations, replacement events, sudden expansions. Humanity was clearly reorganizing itself after environmental catastrophe. The archaeological timeline aligns with this instability remarkably well. Then there are the ancient records themselves. One of the most overlooked facts in ancient history is that many early civilizations believed they were inheritors of older knowledge. The Egyptians claimed sacred wisdom came from earlier divine ages. Mesopotamians preserved flood traditions tied to pre-catastrophe kings. Indian texts described previous cycles of civilization. Mesoamerican traditions spoke of earlier worlds destroyed before the current age. These cultures did not view themselves as the beginning. They viewed themselves as survivors. Modern civilization assumes history begins with us. Ancient civilizations often believed history had already happened before. That difference matters, because psychologically, humans struggle to imagine total collapse. Modern society feels permanent, but it is extraordinarily fragile. Global infrastructure depends on stable climate, energy systems, communication networks, agriculture, and international trade. Disrupt enough of those simultaneously, and civilization destabilizes rapidly. The Younger Dryas likely involved exactly that kind of systems collapse: rapid climate reversal, flooding, food chain disruption, population displacement, possibly years of atmospheric chaos. Even a technologically advanced civilization could fail under those conditions, especially if concentrated near vulnerable coastlines. And perhaps that explains the strange emotional tone found in many ancient traditions. A sense of inherited loss. Golden ages remembered dimly. Sacred knowledge fragmented. Warnings repeated through myth. It is almost as though ancient civilizations were trying to preserve memory after surviving something they feared humanity would eventually forget. And maybe they were right. Because for most of modern history, we dismissed ancient catastrophe stories as primitive superstition, until geology started confirming parts of them. Now an uncomfortable possibility is emerging. What if humanity's oldest myths were never intended as fantasy? What if they were compressed historical memory encoded symbolically, because that was the only way to preserve them across thousands of years? And what if the Anunnaki, the gods descending from heaven, were not aliens, but the final remnants of a scientifically advanced world destroyed by the Younger Dryas catastrophe. A world whose survivors became kings, priests, astronomers, and culture bearers in the civilizations that followed. A world almost completely erased by floodwaters, fire, sediment, and time. But not erased enough, because traces still remain. In stone, in myth, in genetics, in buried coastlines, and in the geological scar left by the day the sky changed human history forever. If you're enjoying the series, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below. Do you think mainstream history will eventually accept the possibility of a lost civilization before the Younger Dryas? Or will the idea always remain controversial? If the Younger Dryas catastrophe really erased a technologically sophisticated civilization from Earth, then one final question remains. Could it happen again? Scientifically, the answer is uncomfortable. Yes. Earth exists inside a dynamic and unstable cosmic environment. Asteroid impacts, comet fragmentation, solar activity, geomagnetic instability, and abrupt climate shifts are all real processes documented throughout geological history. The Younger Dryas may not have been unique, only recent, and the evidence suggests ancient civilizations understood that far better than we do. Modern society tends to view the cosmos as distant and stable. Ancient cultures did not. They watched the sky obsessively. The Maya tracked Venus cycles with extraordinary precision. Babylonian astronomers documented planetary motion continuously. Chinese records preserved centuries of comet observations. Egyptian temples aligned to stellar events. Nearly every advanced ancient civilization treated astronomy as sacred. Why? Because for them, the sky was not abstract. It was existential. A civilization that survived a cosmic catastrophe would never stop monitoring celestial cycles. And perhaps that is exactly what happened after the Younger Dryas. One of the most discussed modern candidates connected to the catastrophe is the torrid meteor stream. Earth passes through this debris field regularly. Most particles are harmless. But astronomers studying the torrids discovered something unusual. The stream contains exceptionally large objects hidden within it. Some researchers proposed that the Younger Dryas event originated from a giant comet fragmenting into the torrid complex thousands of years ago. If true, then Earth may still periodically encounter dangerous debris from the same source. This is not fringe speculation. NASA and multiple observatories actively track near-Earth objects because impacts remain a real threat. The difference is scale. Small impacts happen frequently. Civilization-scale impacts are rare, but rare is not the same as impossible. The geological record proves Earth has experienced catastrophic impacts repeatedly. The Chicxulub impact ended the age of dinosaurs. The Younger Dryas may have nearly ended organized human civilization before recorded history even began. And this changes how we interpret the ancient world. Because perhaps humanity's oldest monuments were not built merely to worship gods. Perhaps they were built to preserve continuity, to survive memory loss. Göbekli Tepe may have been part observatory, part ceremonial site, part warning. The pyramids may have encoded astronomical cycles because celestial timing mattered desperately to the people preserving that knowledge. Ancient flood myths may not be symbolic morality tales. They may be compressed disaster records. And the Anunnaki themselves may represent something profoundly human. The survivors of a collapsed world whose knowledge became mythologized over generations. not aliens descending from space, but people mistaken for gods because they remembered what everyone else had forgotten. That possibility explains the ancient texts more cleanly than either mainstream dismissal or extreme ancient astronaut theories. Because after societal collapse, knowledge inequality becomes enormous. Imagine preserving advanced astronomy while surrounding populations struggle to rebuild agriculture. Imagine understanding geometry, navigation, and engineering in a world dominated by survival. To future generations, you would become legendary and eventually divine. This transformation happens constantly throughout history. Real rulers become mythic heroes. Historical disasters become supernatural judgment. Technological systems become sacred ritual. The Younger Dryas may simply represent the largest version of that process humanity ever experienced. And there is one final detail that makes this theory difficult to ignore: the timeline. Again and again, the dates converge around the same narrow window. 12,800 years ago. Abrupt climate collapse, impact indicators, extinction waves, flooding, buried coastlines. Then suddenly, agriculture, astronomy, megalithic architecture, civilization. It looks less like a beginning and more like a restart. Mainstream archaeology still debates whether an advanced pre-Younger Dryas civilization truly existed. And to be clear, there is no universally accepted proof of a lost global super-civilization. That distinction matters. But there is growing evidence that human prehistory was far more complex than the old linear model allowed. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe alone forced archaeologists to rethink the capabilities of Ice Age humans. Future discoveries may force far larger revisions, especially as underwater archaeology expands, because the oceans remain the greatest missing chapter in human history. Most Ice Age coastlines, where advanced settlements would logically exist, are still unexplored beneath rising seas. What we call the origin of civilization may simply reflect the oldest surviving ruins still above water. Nothing more. And perhaps the most important lesson is not about the past at all. It is about fragility. Modern civilization feels permanent because we inherited functioning systems: electricity, satellites, global trade, digital archives, industrial agriculture. But the Younger Dryas reminds us how quickly planetary conditions can change. A sufficiently large impact, solar event, or climate disruption could fracture modern civilization far faster than most people imagine. And thousands of years later, survivors might remember us the same way ancient civilizations remembered their predecessors: as a lost world, a golden age, a civilization swallowed by catastrophe, reduced to myth. Maybe that is why ancient cultures obsessed over cycles, because they understood something modern civilization forgot. Human progress is not guaranteed. History is not a straight line, and civilization may survive only as long as humanity remembers how fragile it truly is. If you enjoyed this series, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Do you think the Younger Dryas erased a forgotten civilization from human history? Or are we seeing patterns where none really exist? And if humanity once rebuilt from near extinction before, would we even recognize the warning signs if it started happening again?